Hey everybody, I'm DJ Wooldridge.
And I'm Ken Whiting.
And thank you for joining us on our journey through horror. This week we watched
Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock.
One of the greats, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's kind of weird, but I've seen bits and pieces of it on TV and stuff, but it's one of those movies when you see on TV, you're like, no. I'm going to wait till I can watch it the way it was meant to be watched.
Which is good. You don't want to take it piece by piece.
Exactly. As always, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so if you haven't seen Psycho, do what I did and watch it, for crying out loud. So Ken exposed me to it this week, and I gotta tell you, Ken, right off the bat, I was a little bored to begin with, because going into it, most of the big twists have permeated pop culture at this point, and I knew Janet Leigh was gonna die about halfway through, and I kind of felt like it was inconsequential. Like, I didn't care about the money, I was just waiting for the good stuff. And it turns out that her story actually informs the rest of the film, so once it kind of kicked into that, I was really engaged in it, and of course it's Hitchcock, so it was really well structured and really well shot.
I think Hitchcock has a long drag, and it feels boring sometimes, but he's actually telling you important parts of the story that he's asking you to look out for.
Yeah, and I think part of it was that partial knowledge of understanding what was going to happen to Janet Leigh, but not knowing how it informed the rest of the plot. Like, I thought it was going to be inconsequential, and I could see where if you were just sitting in the theater for the first time, how that build, you really believe that she's the main character. We had a bunch of false start protagonists. Like, we had Janet Leigh, and then we had the detective, and then finally her sister and her boyfriend kind of come in to sew the thing up. Once the structure of the film came into place, and once I saw how Janet Leigh's story informed the rest of the story, and I think more specifically, the second Norman Bates entered, it became much more compelling to me. It's almost like I allowed myself to take in the craft of the film. Even though I knew the twists, Anthony Perkins' performance as Norman Bates was really great. Like, I would say he's the performance of the film because he does a good job of playing that line of being really weird, but disarming to begin with. Like you understand when he's interacting with Janet Leigh, it's like, oh, he's strange, he's damaged, but he's not threatening in any way. It's not really till later that you see kind of the terror this character can bring.
I think the paranoia in Janet Leigh's character, right off the bat, on her way out of town, stealing $40,000, she sees her boss. And now she's instantly paranoid.
Yeah.
And then she decides to sleep on the side of the road, and a cop comes up and now is following her. Instantly, you're drawn to how her life's about to change. I think that's what makes Hitchcock so great, because then, after he's telling you that story, 40 minutes, an hour into the movie, he wants to tell you a different story about this character who's playing, in his own mind, both himself and his mom.
Yeah, exactly. The way the film begins is very Telltale Heart-like. Yeah. And that's another aspect of the film I really enjoyed, how it definitely feels like a bridge to the horror movies that are to come, and the classic Gothic horror, like Dracula and House on Haunted Hill, like, because you see the motel and it's kind of a modern visage of this motel where people stay, the 60s, that vibe. But then the house on the hill looks like something from one of those old Universal horror films.
It's almost always in shadow. It's hard to tell it's hard to really see what's going on.
Obviously, there's that pivotal scene right at the heart of the movie where Janet Leigh gets murdered. And it was weird watching it because you can see, like, watching it from the future, you know how that one scene in and of itself influences whole genres of film. Like, would you say that Psycho is the proto-slasher film?
Maybe for American audiences, because at this point you had Giallo, which is it's Italian for yellow. Yellow was the color printed on paperback books for crime thrillers and sci-fi fantasy thrillers.
So it's kind of like pulp.
It was like a pulpy version of horror in Italy. It became in the late 50s, early 60s, and then really took off in the 70s and 80s as a psychosis of slasher films. And so Psycho was maybe America's first taste to that. Alfred Hitchcock knew a lot about European film too, and he knew a lot about European culture, and that absolutely influenced his work and our exposure to it.
Hitchcock's a very careful director. It's one thing to see like a trashy movie, like pair up sexuality and violence in a certain way, to see Hitchcock do it in kind of his early stages, and you know it was very intentional, but you see the way it kind of like opened the floodgates. I know how I feel about it, but I'm wondering what you think. Do you think there's an element of irresponsibility to marrying the sexuality and the violence there?
No, I think it was something at this point that he'd been doing for 30 years. This was the perfection of his craft. This was showing the human flesh as something appealing and tantalizing, as much as it was showing the complete interest of somebody else's psychosis. We always want to see somebody else's problems. And so a lot of Hitchcock movies excelled at his people, his characters, being really fucked up. to paint a more colorful picture, he took sex and violence and he made it operatic. In the movie Hitchcock, which is all about his production of Psycho and how hard of a time he was having getting the studios to back it, the scene when his movie's first being screened, he's in the lobby as she's being murdered, and he's out there directing it like a composer. Because to him, this was a beautiful scene that he wanted people to have emotional waves with him. He wanted to lead their emotions. And it's like, there's no better way to tell an emotional story in America than through sex and violence.
And I think to go along with that, I feel like there's a very, especially with the time, you're just coming out of the code era where things are really tied down. And so when you see the beginning of that shower scene, it seems very tantalizing. It seems like something like from the Giallos or the Pulps or whatever. And so you start tantalizing the audience, and then you almost punish them with the violence that follows. It makes them complicit with Norman. You're tantalized by it. You're faced with at the time, was probably, with some of the audience, a form of self-loathing. Mm-hmm. And then that expresses itself in violence.
It's hard to see a movie like Psycho and not think Stanley Kubrick was inspired by this when he wrote The Shining. And that's a part of what Hitchcock did. Hitchcock, not only did he crank out movies for so long, he made movies that changed your whole perspective. I think Psycho sets a really freaky tone for what it's like to be the sick person and to kind of feel empathy and sympathy for a character that you know is completely fucked up, but you hope it's okay at the end. And then at the end of Psycho, when you hear Norma's voice talking, you're just like, this is... He needs to die.
Yeah, he's gone. All right, everybody, do that like and subscribe thing if you haven't already. Also, if you don't know already, this guy and myself and Joe Beretta and Harley Morenstein made a short film. It sure is a head trip. And if you want to click this right here, that'll take you to the short film. But if you want to see that short in a feature film,
The ABCs of Death, Part 2.
Which is a horror anthology. And if you want to see us in the ABCs of Death Part 2, you got to go in the description of this video or of the short itself. Hit that link and hit the Facebook like button. The more likes we get, the better chance we have of being in the top 12 and going on to being in the feature film. And of course you want to see that. Who doesn't want to see Joe Beretta and Harley Morenstein on the big screen? We're really proud of the short. We really think it came out great. And we think you'll enjoy it as well. So please follow that link and then follow the other link in the description and then hit like. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's DJ Wooldridge.
And I'm Ken Whiting. Thanks for kicking Norman Bates into the river with us.